Two grandmas who look like they couldn't hurt a fly. Except that they killed two innocent homeless men, so I wouldn't be surprised if they could also hurt a fly. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel where we talk about Hungarian true crime cases, and my name is Tímea, and today's video is in collaboration with my friend here on YouTube, Jillian Chanelle. We decided to work together on two cases, one here and one on her channel, so after you're done here, make sure to head over to her channel and check out the crazy case that she chose. We are presenting these stories, taking turns, and she's amazing. I know that you will love it there. Make sure that you subscribe to her channel too. Today's case here is going to be about the Black Widow murders, and I'm not sure how well known it is. It's an American case, but it involves two Hungarians, and I hope that you will like it and how we present it with Jillian. Now, let's get started because this video is gonna be crazy. It was on the 8th of November 1999 that the LAPD got a 911 call about an apparent hit and run in which a white elderly man was killed. When the police arrived at the scene, it really looked like the man must have been passed out drunk on the ground when a car ran over him. And they were able to identify him based on his fingerprints as the 73-year-old Hungarian immigrant named Paul Vados. Yes, I guess if you say it with an English accent, it would be Vados, but I'm not going to say that. Not much is known about Paul other than the fact that he was born in Budapest on the 28th of March 1926 and that he was married to a woman named Vados Bojtár Judit. They emigrated to the USA together where they lived happily until the untimely death of his wife in 1985. And not long before his death, he had been reported as missing by his now fiancée, Helen and Olga, and his cousin, Olga Schmidt. A toxicology test was done on his body, which came back with the results that showed no evidence of any drugs or alcohol in his system, so the police theory that he must have been passed out drunk when a car ran over him was out the window. But either way, his fiancée, Helen, took possession of his remains from the morgue, and just a few days later, his cousin, Olga, went to the police station to request his death certificate. Now, the lead investigator in this case was a man named Lee Willman, and he said that there was something so weird about Olga. Like she just didn't seem upset, she looked completely emotionless, especially for someone whose cousin just died of a terrible accident. And of course, you can write it off as everybody grieves differently, or maybe they didn't have such a close relationship. But it was still enough for the detective to be suspicious. Unfortunately, there were no witnesses, no CCTV footage, absolutely no evidence to go on, so his case went cold for the next 6 years. On the 22nd of June 2005, the LAPD got another 911 call about a hit-and-run accident in a dark alley. This time, the victim was the 50-year-old Kenneth McDavid, and the police was able to identify him because in his pocket was this weird DIY laminated ID card. It wasn't anything official, it wasn't government issued, and it didn't belong to any institution. It looked like somebody just made it for him so that his body would be identified. In fact, the police described this ID card as a dog tag. We know a little bit more about Kenneth than about Paul. We know that he was the middle child out of 5 siblings, and that he used to be a great student with a bright future. But unfortunately, something happened after high school and he changed. He decided not to go to college, which had been his lifelong dream. and he couldn't hold down a job for a long time. He became estranged from his family and friends, and his family thought that he might have had undiagnosed schizophrenia that he just didn't get help for in time. But either way, several years before his untimely death, he had no contact with any of his family members. Now, going back to his death, his skull and his chest were crushed, which is actually very uncommon for a hit-and-run victim. Also, on his clothes was some smeared grease that looked like it would come from the undercarriage of a car, so it made the lead detective, named Dennis Kilcoyne, to assume that he must have been passed out drunk on the ground when a car ran over him. Furthermore, next to his body, they found this bicycle with the front tire removed, so it looked like Kenneth was repairing the tire. There were only 3 things that really didn't make sense about this clue. First of all, the bike was in the dark and cramped alley. It wasn't a good place for someone to try to repair a bike. If Kenneth was really trying to repair this bike, he could have just moved it to the well-lit and spacious street a couple of feet away. Why didn't he do that? Besides, the tire wasn't damaged in any way at all, so it didn't even need fixing. And third of all, Kenneth was not in the state to be fixing a bicycle, because the toxicology report came back with the results of very high levels of alcohol, zolpidem, and hydrocodone. This would have been enough to knock him out, so he definitely wasn't repairing that bike. It was looking more and more like a staged crime scene rather than a terrible hit-and-run accident. And the police this time had the evidence to prove that, because a CCTV camera was positioned right at the alley and there was footage of the accident. Well, not really, because you couldn't see either the victim or the perpetrator on it. But what you could see was that a station wagon, either a Ford Taurus or a Mercury Sable, passed the CCTV camera and went into the alley. Now it was dark, so all the camera showed was that the brake lights came on, and then all of the car's vehicles went dark for 5 minutes. And then after that, all of the car's lights came back on and the car drove away. Now, the police was certain that it was no accident. So let's see what Jillian has to say about the investigation.
The only thing police had was Kenneth's last known address. The landlord told police that Kenneth no longer lived there because he was poor, and because of this he had ended up homeless. But the landlord also knew that there was an older lady named Helen and Olga who offered to take the poor homeless man in, because of course she was a saint. Before police could even track Helen down, she had already claimed his remains, went down to the morgue, and had him cremated. And Olga had already went to the police station to request his death certificate. The devil works hard, but Helen and Olga work harder. In the meantime, an insurance company named Mutual of New York, or the Money Group Incorporated, opened up an investigation on 2 life insurance policies on Kenneth McDavid. Even though the insurance policy seemed legit at first, the insurance investigator named Ed Webster noticed some inconsistencies right away. On both policies, which totaled $1 million, the beneficiaries listed were Helen and Olga. On the policies, they were listed as business partners of Kenneth, but at the police station and the morgue, they claimed to be his fiance and his cousin, just like what they did with Paul. And basically, all the information on the policy was completely fake. It contained information on Kenneth's workplace address and income, all of which he didn't have because he was homeless, jobless, so none of this added up. When Ed Webster, the insurance investigator, tried to talk to Helen and Olga about this false information, the woman refused to talk to him. So he was left with little to no choice. He had to turn the 2 in to police. When he went went to the police station and him and the detective were talking about this case. Detective Lee Willman couldn't help but overhear the two's conversation. William was the investigator in Paul Vados' unsolved case. So when he heard what the two were talking about, a suspicious unsolved hit-and-run case, and Helen and Olga were involved, his spidey senses started tingling and he immediately knew that this was familiar territory. So the two cases were connected, and not only were they treated as a case of insurance fraud, but now also murder. The FBI was called in on this case, and the investigation revealed some very interesting things. These two old women, who were both in their 70s, had taken more than 20 policies on Paul and Kenneth, totaling over $5 million, despite the fact that these two men were both homeless and unemployed. Unfortunately, police had no idea who they were messing with when they were investigating Helen and Olga, who ultimately killed these two innocent men.
Okay, but who were Helen and Olga anyway? Well, Helen was born in Texas in 1931, and I don't know anything about her mom or her other family members, but we know that her father died in a car accident when she was very young. So she was passed around amongst family members until she ended up in foster care. She was married twice and she had 3 children. She was a grandma and all. And in the 1980s, she somehow ended up in Santa Monica. There, she tried herself in the real estate business. But unfortunately for her, making money off of rental properties wasn't as lucrative as she had thought because there were some pretty strict tenant rights at that time. So she decided to instead snoop on her tenants and later extort them for money, blackmailing them and stuff. She also had a real estate partner named Artie Aaron, who died of cancer in 1999, but just before his death, Helen somehow mysteriously acquired power of attorney over his real estate holdings, which added up to millions, so now Helen was suddenly a millionaire. Furthermore, she made good money for herself from suing people. She sued pretty much everybody that was unlucky enough to meet her. She was described as this evil mastermind. She looked down on anyone she didn't think was on her level, and her hairdresser knew her best, and this hairdresser had a lot to say about her. For example, once Helen told her that she thought that the victims of the Hurricane Katrina were useless people using the welfare of the government and just leeching off of society. Once she also said that had she been young again, she would marry an old rich man and then kill him with Viagra. She explicitly told her hairdresser that you don't know how evil I am. I mean, you just have to look at her haircut. Like, she looks like an evil person, honestly. Like, she looks stupid too, but also evil. I really hope that that hairdresser got good money for creating something so hideous on this evil bitch. Her bestie, Olga Rutte-Schmidt, was actually also a Hungarian immigrant. All we know about her is that she was born in Budapest as Pap Olga in 1933, and she got married and she emigrated to the US in 1957. She eventually became a widow, she claimed a mental disability and moved to Hollywood. In her neighborhood, she was known as the crazy old lady who was always flying off the handle and was overly talkative. Helen and Olga had one thing in common for sure, which was suing people. Olga loved petty lawsuits. In fact, the handyman of the apartment building where she lived at once asked her what she did for a living, to which Olga replied that she sued people. One example of that was when she went to a coffee shop and she ordered a muffin According to her, it was inedible. So she started acting up until she was escorted out of the cafe shop by one of the other customers. So she decided to sue both the cafe and this customer for causing her great mental distress. Unfortunately for her, she had to drop that lawsuit because the aforementioned handyman offered to give a scathing testimony about her character, and she knew that she would lose the lawsuit, so she dropped it. When she wasn't suing people as a career, she was running a credit card scheme. One of her neighbors said that she once showed him 40 credit cards that she was using in rotation to avoid paying taxes and to rip off the credit card companies. Other than that, she was an introverted lady, she kept to herself, and she liked complaining about the noise levels of her neighbors. I guess she was a Karen before Karens were a thing. I can almost hear in her high, shrill, ugly voice with her stupid Hungarian accent, like, "I will sue you." Olga and Helen met in a Hollywood health club in the 80s. And they soon became friends because they had so many things in common, like suing people, cheating them out of their money, running their petty little scams and all. It's a great basis for a friendship, if you ask me. They became a little team and they started hanging out at expensive hotels, at the pool area, pose as guests, and flirt with wealthy, old, rich men. I mean, I don't really know how they did that because they weren't young or pretty anymore, but somehow they still managed to get dates, get expensive dinners and gifts out of these men, and sometimes they would just outright rob these old men. But those were small-time cons. They wanted something bigger. So in 1997, they went to the Hollywood Presbyterian Church and offered their help for the less fortunate. Helen would offer to give one of her apartments to the homeless people and pay their bills until they could get back on their feet, while Olga would be their day-to-day caretaker and devote her time to them. They specifically targeted elderly homeless men with no family at all, and all these men had to do in exchange for free accommodation and help was to sign some papers and give some personal details. But let's hear Jillian tell you what exactly they did to those poor men.
Paul stayed in one of Helen's apartments for 2 years rent-free while Olga was his everyday caretaker. And little did Paul know, both of these women had taken out life insurance policies on him, both together and separately. When it was time to murder Paul, they drugged him, knocked him unconscious, dragged him into a deserted alley, ran over him, killing him instantly. No witnesses, no CCTV, nothing. The policies took over a year to pay out, and they were not happy about this. This is not unusual. Sometimes policies take longer than others to settle and to pay out, but they did what they did best. They were tricksters and ended up suing the insurance company and ended up settling, walking away with $600,000. In the meantime, Helen decided to engage in another interesting little side hustle. Her daughter Keisha befriended a 97-year-old man named Fred Downey and persuaded him to move from Massachusetts to Santa Monica so her mother Helen could take care of him. Almost immediately, Helen and Keisha took control of the title of his house and all of his financial assets and cut out all of his rightful heirs. They drained his accounts, sold his house, literally took everything from this man. While he was under Helen and Olga's care, Fred became so ill and emaciated that he walked into traffic and got hit by a car in November of 2000. He survived this initial hit, but died of his injuries a month later, and his death was written off as accidental. A little background on Helen and her role as a parent. On a scale of 1 to 10, she was about a -6. So why would Keisha want to spend so much time with her mother? The world may never know. But when she was younger, she would meddle with her relationship, telling her that she needed to marry an old rich man and scam him out of his money. One time, she even went up to one of Keisha's old boyfriend's mom and told her that her son simply was not rich or old enough to be with her daughter. One of Keisha's ex-boyfriends even said that Helen threatened him and said that she would kill him if they did not break up. Helen was a terrible mom, and during the trial for the murders of Paul and Kenneth, Helen was not trying to go down for these crimes alone, let alone at all, and said that Keisha was the one who set up the murder scenes, which made sense, right? Because she was a lot stronger, younger, and fitter than these two old ladies, but this was never proven in court. With Paul and Fred Downey now out of sight, out of mind, Helen and Olga were now able to enjoy the money they scammed off of these two men's lives and basically live the good life.
3 years passed and their tank was on E and they needed some more money.
So they went back to Hollywood Presbyterian Church in 2003 where they found Kenneth. They offered the same deal, free housing, in exchange for filling out a few forms. They took out several life insurance policies on him and kept him around for 2 years before drugging him and staging the crime as if it was a hit and run instead of murder. So while the investigation is going on, police are finding out all these crazy stories about these two women. So they decide to put these women under surveillance. And to their horror, they saw that the women were already luring in another victim who they would eventually kill for their life insurance policy. Even though police didn't have solid evidence against them to arrest them for murder, they could prove multiple counts of insurance fraud. So Helen and Olga were arrested for fraud on May 18th of 2006. While in custody, police searched their houses, and they found so much evidence in Helen's house. There were documents of the three men, Paul Vados, Fred Downey, and Kenneth McDavid, as well as rubber stamps for Paul and Kenneth's signatures, as well as large quantities of hydrocodone and zolpidem. They also found a stolen driver's license with a sticky note that had a license plate number on it. The police tracked the license plate number and found that it belonged to a Mercury Sable station wagon and had been purchased using a name from a stolen ID. Things were now starting to make sense to police. Police also found out that on the night of Kenneth's death, Helen called AAA to have the station wagon towed because it had broken down not too far from where Kenneth's body was. Helen told the tow truck guy that she must have run into something that broke the fuel line, so she had the car towed to her house and then she basically left it somewhere abandoned. Almost a year had passed since Kenneth's murder, but police really needed to find evidence against them so they can be convicted and arrested for this. So they searched the station wagon and really honed in their search to underneath the car. And luckily they did because they found Kenneth's blood there. The women were arrested and the media picked up this story. An article was published about the arrest of these two women. A man named Jimmy Covington recognized these two women and told police that they tried their tricks on him too and tried to lure him to scam him. He said that in 2001, he was approached by Olga. He was homeless at the time and she offered him a place to stay in exchange for some information on him. At first he was interested, but these women were so pushy and really were trying to pressure him on giving them information, and he did not like this. He thought this was really sketchy, so he decided not to take their offer. But the two had already taken out a life insurance policy on him. These bitches were quick.
So Olga and Helen were in custody, and at first they exercised their right to remain silent. So the police put the two together into an interrogation room and left them there alone. Olga, not being the sharpest tool in the shed, unaware that they were being recorded, immediately started telling Helen off, telling her that she was too greedy, she made too many insurances in her Hungarian grammar logic, and even after Helen tried to shush Olga and tell her to shut up because they were being recorded, she just couldn't keep her mouth shut. She kept talking. I always wanted to know this. People who don't know that they are being recorded in a police interrogation room, like, did they never see a single movie in their life or what? But anyway, It was on the 18th of March 2008 that Helen, who was now 77, and Olga, who was 75, were tried together for the first-degree murders of Paul Vados and Kenneth McDavid, as well as the conspiracy to commit the first-degree murder of Fred Downey, which was dropped because his death was ruled as an accident. Both women pled not guilty, but their defense strategies were very weak, and besides, the tape of them in the interrogation room was a very good evidence, and the jury was convinced of their guilt. A month later, on the 18th of April 2008, they were both found guilty of conspiracy to murder Paul and Kenneth, and the first-degree murder of Paul. But only Helen was convicted for the first-degree murder of Kenneth. Both Helen and Olga were sentenced to consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. And I am not sure if they are still alive, but if they are, then Helen would be 90 years old now and Olga would be 88. The docuseries Wicked Attraction also covered their case in an episode titled The Golden Years, which is the second episode of the second season. And it's available in Amazon Prime in the US, so if it's available for you, then you should definitely check it out. I wish I could, but it's not available in Hungary.
Thank you for making it through this video with us. We really enjoyed doing this collab together and are so happy that you came along for the ride. I really love when Tímea does the Hungarian word of the day. I think it's the cutest thing, so I told her I had to do it for this video. I'm very American, so let's try this out. Today's Hungarian word of the day, or I guess phrase of the day, is going to be for Black Widow, and it is Fakata Uzvik. Tímea told me how to pronounce that, and I hope I did her justice.
I think she meant Fekete Özvegy.
If you guys enjoyed my presence in this YouTube video, please not only make sure to go check out the video we did together on my page, but maybe subscribe. That would be great.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I see you next time. Bye!